Okay, well, I think we had a little bit past the hour here, so we can get going. Welcome, everybody. I want to take this time to thank you all for joining us today for this topic, which is very timely, I believe. And I also want to thank you for kicking off the leap year with us today. What better way to start off the leap year than with discussions of responsible AI? I'll start off by basically, first of all, I want to thank Grant Thornton for sponsoring this topic, this subject today, and for preparing and planning this session for us all today. And again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. We'll jump right in, and I'm sure folks will stream in as we get started here. I want to just, first of all, kick off by introducing the speakers that will be talking today. First, Dr. Florian Schiriau. He's the partner and the head of cybersecurity at Grant Thornton, also a data privacy expert. And myself, Chris Stevenson, the head of AI strategy and operations for Nuix. Very briefly, the agenda is to go through the introductions, which effectively we've already done. I'm going to hand it over shortly to Dr. Florian Schiriau, and he's going to give some overview of Grant Thornton and some insights that I think will basically set the context for today's discussion. And then I will walk you through an introduction, a very brief introduction to Nuix to set some context there and provide the presentation on responsible AI, particularly in this data-driven world that we find ourselves in. And what I want to do is encourage everyone to share their questions through the chat so that we can make sure we get through this hour. It's a very tight time frame and a very heavy subject, so we want to make sure we have plenty of time to get through everything. So if you have questions, please submit them to the chat, and our team will curate those and make sure we can try to get to those. Sometimes we'll be able to get to them through the content that's being delivered. Otherwise, we can hit them afterwards, and we will both be here to basically get through as many of those as we can in the hour. So with that, I'd like to just kick it off and send it over to Dr. Florian Schiriau for his insights and overview of Grant Thornton.
Thank you very much, Christopher. I'd like to give you a brief glance of Grant Thornton, but we are not the main point of the discussion. So we are an audit firm here in Germany within the international Grant Thornton network. We are almost everywhere where our clients are. You only see a couple of white spots on the map. I think that aligns pretty much with the known world as it stands right now, with a couple of known exceptions. For example, in Russia, where business is currently quite problematic for well-known reasons. But I do not want to linger on our organization, but I want to actually focus on the topic of today, which is working with data, because that is the main part of what we are doing, and the main driver of our growth is that our clients are facing serious issues. For example, in forensic investigations, data is growing exponentially, especially the data that is of interest in forensic investigations. So the first e-discoveries I've seen were only containing a couple of gigabytes. Now, the biggest e-discovery currently host exceeds a petabyte. And these numbers are staggering. When I compare it, if I compare the time it took us at the beginning of, let's say, 2010 to crunch these numbers, we are still at roughly the same time. So the technology has to keep up with the tremendous increase in data growth. And the only way we can handle that is with strong partners. And here Nuix is our strongest. Therefore, I'm really happy that we can work together. But forensic investigation is not the only thing where we see exponential growth in data, where we have to be able to get a grasp on what is going on. For example, cyber incident responses. When data has been exfiltrated by a ransomware group, we have to understand what is in there. Personal identifiable information, contracts, sensitive business information. These information have to be identified fast, especially when you're in a situation where you might want to, for example, decide if you need to negotiate. If you do not know what's on the table, you have no idea what cards you're holding. And again, you need a way to find a way to get through huge amounts of data fast. And that's where we extensively collaborate with our colleagues here in Blue from Nuix. And also even from outside the standard use cases, for example, in digital advisories, we have to understand what is within an organization in terms of data. What are they working with in terms of contracts? What are our boundary conditions? But most of our clients do not really know what is the context of their contracts with suppliers, with customers, and we have to discover that. And we are sometimes really hard pressed to get this information on time. And again, that is something where we have to use the right the right solutions. And Christopher, I'm really glad that you will enlighten us on a couple of these solutions today.
Thank you very much for that. And I do want to sort of echo the, first of all, I want to just acknowledge the challenges that you must face every day, given that you're in cyber and data privacy, being where you reside, the things that you must see on a day-to-day basis. It's fascinating time we're going through. And I do think the missing piece in this cybersecurity data privacy world is truly understanding the content itself. So much of the world has been addressing it from the metadata side, or maybe where the data is stored, or maybe what the file type, what the file name is, what the extension is, where it's located. But without understanding the context, it really changes the dynamics substantially. So to your point, I think there's a lot of challenges here. And well, I guess we'll take it from there. I appreciate that introduction. So very brief introduction to Nuix. Nuix is a global investigative analytics and intelligence solutions company. It is based in Australia, and we work with some of the largest government and private entities on the planet. Basically, we're an engine that enables leading teams to perform some of their most challenging data issues, ranging from investigations, e-discovery, records retention management, and so on. So we're right in the heart and the thick of what organizations need to deal with in terms of understanding, interpreting, making sense of, and de-risking their data. Just some basic numbers. We've been at this for 20 years. Once again, we were founded in Canberra, Australia. In 2006, we commercialized the engine that drives a lot of our value, and our patented engine is really sort of the core of everything we do. We basically have over 1,000 different customers around the globe in government, law enforcement, legal, corporates, and so on. Grant Thornton's one of our many partners. We have a small number of very closely held large partners, such as Grant Thornton, and 150 total partners, 11 offices, and a little over 400 employees. So this is just sort of our Nuix in numbers, but really it's what do we do and why? So I want to touch on that a little bit. Our new CEO came in a couple of years ago and really looked at what our mission was, what our goal was, and what we had been working on, and really described what we're doing as really the goal is to be a force for good out there. Now, we know that's a subjective term, but it really is a North Star for us. So how do we use technology to help our customers effectively be the force for good that they are? And this on the right just shows some of the investigations and large situations that our technology has been used to resolve. Typically, if you see something on the front page of the newspaper that is a major investigation, our technology has likely been used as part of that investigation. So being a force for good is really what we want to be. And how we do that, as Florian alluded to, is really leveraging technology and advanced technology. And there's no way to do that without artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, to really be able to find that truth in digital data. It reduces our friction, it shortens our time to value. Ultimately, I think those are understating it. It's literally impossible to get through the amount of data that we need to get through without these advanced capabilities and uncovering those hidden insights within the data to do our day-to-day jobs. And as described, that data is going up exponentially. At the same time, regulations are creating all kinds of complexities across the globe. So AI and ML really changes the game. But the reason why we're here today is this is a big but in this scenario, is that AI comes with risks and challenges of its own. And I don't need to go through these headlines, hammer and tongs. Since the creation of this slide, there are a number of other cases that have come up that are just as concerning and just as complex as these. So it is a very challenging time to apply artificial intelligence to these data challenges that we have. And that really means we need to have strong governance and strong controls to be able to do it. At the same time, we don't want those controls to be too tight because we'll undermine the value of the AI. So it's a very tricky business that we're in. And I'm hoping to demystify some of that with you today. I like to do it from a perspective of how Nuix is handling it. So we want to put ourselves in the passenger seat with you today to share with you how we as a company are approaching this, not as just a provider of AI, but actually as an organization who is dealing with the complexities and challenges of AI and how we want to be good stewards of that. Because I think that can reflect upon how you folks may be able to bring it into your own organizations in the same way. So the first thing I want to lead off with is just this quote from Fei-Fei Li from Stanford University's Human-Centered AI Institute. We do have a responsibility as technologists and business leaders to ensure that technology we create benefits humanity and does not harm it. And it's a very important thing to think about as you develop these technologies, deploy them, and so on, that we really need to think about the outcomes. And I think that's really what we're going to be talking about today. So this is really important to remember. The complicating factor of this is that globally, AI regulations are what I call all over the map. That's a term we use in the US. So it's literally and figuratively all over the map. The emerging regulations are very complex, and they're not consistently applied across the board. Everyone's aware that Europe's AI Act seems to be leading the charge. It also seems to be the regulation that has the most teeth in it, if you will. And so the world really looks to Europe as a regulatory superpower, if you will, and takes a lot of its nods from there. But you see a lot of these are very much frameworks. They're non-binding. In some cases, and in other cases, they may be, very harsh penalties and so on. So how do we sift through and make sense of and apply these various regulations? It can be quite a challenge. One of the things that I think that happens here is that people get stuck in what I call deer in the headlights. That there's too much going on, it's sensory overload, and they just shut down and say, what should we do? First thing that I think of is the EU AI Act the new GDPR? And what I mean by that, is it going to become the standard by which we should hold ourselves or at least aspire to achieve? My opinion on that is yes, that I think if GDPR is to be a sort of the canary in the coal mine, if you will, or a predictor, my sense is that eventually we will begin to adopt the kinds of regulations that the EU AI Act has put forth. It is not a perfect document by any stretch, but I do think that they have a good lead on this. And in our world, we're a highly regulated company, a publicly traded company in a highly regulated country of Australia as the foundation. And we work with many highly regulated organizations in law enforcement, finance, healthcare, and in the legal space. So in our opinion, leaning that direction makes a lot of sense. So where do we start with responsible AI? This is a big question we hear all the time from our customers. And maybe we should just wait it out and see, where things go down the road and pause on this. Our suggestion, do not wait. You can take pragmatic steps today to embrace responsible AI, and sort of take, tactical steps that don't necessarily put you in harm's way. You don't want to wait. This thing is moving too fast. So we can't afford. So how do you approach that? Well, what we did is we, worked with our general counsel, our data privacy officer, and basically a team of people across our organization from each of the constituent departments. And we decided to make the problem smaller. What are the geographic locations and the associated regulations that seem to be the most resonant and the most forward-leaning? And then pick those as our attack areas. So in our case, we have a strong footprint in the US, in Australia, and Europe. And we decided that we would set these as our goals to align ourselves with these regulations. So make the problem smaller by addressing the regulations that make the most sense for your organization, and then identify the kinds of requirements and the call outs that they make in those regulations to align yourself to those. And so, and I've also added here to this slide, the ISO 42001 is the world's first AI management system standard, which makes it an additional layer of auditable assessment for your technologies as well. So using this as a methodology, we were able to really kind of focus our attentions. We then looked at this and did a crosswalk. We wanted to see and extract from each of these regulations what were the key components that kept coming up that were important to these regulations, and see if we can find some common denominators that we could share to drive how we thought about AI and really help us create our own internal responsible AI principles, right? So what we did is we looked at each of these, NIST, EU AI Act, Australia, and across the board, and found these commonalities. For example, explainability, transparency, the interpretability of the models seem to be a consistent theme across all of these. So explainability became one of our founding principles. But interestingly, we also have our own set of principles and guiding principles and a mission and vision. And so we also didn't want to be just held to those standards. We wanted to kind of go above and beyond and differentiate ourselves in the market as well. So you'll notice there are two key things here that have very little, descriptions in these regulations, but where we believe in the responsible AI for ourselves. So accessibility is one of those. Accessibility, I'll go through all of these in a bit, but it's making sure that access to the technology is capable, not necessarily from a data science perspective or an engineering perspective, but really putting the technology in the hands of the domain expert in an explainable and understandable way. So really making that access more broadly available. And also specificity. We really believe that if you want to get out of AI the true value and the results that you're seeking, and you want to minimize your exposure and your risks, you really need to get very specific about what you're trying to do with the AI. And so containing those use cases, making them specific, drives accuracy and ensures that what you're doing is purposeful and effective while also shrinking your risk footprint. And of course, fairness and safety as far as reliability, bias mitigation, data rights, human rights, and so on were critical. So again, this is just our approach to try to make this a little bit more accessible and tangible, because it can be very overwhelming if you try to do everything all at once. So I'd like to take a look at how we came upon our own principles using some of the methods that we just walked through. But I want to talk about, from our origin story, how did we come up with the principles that we believe in? And I'll take you on that journey right now, because I think it might be instructive for how you can think about doing it for your own organizations. So as I mentioned, our core vision, if you will, our core mission statement, why we get out of bed every day, is to truly be a force for good at our core. But how do we do that? How does that practically get applied in the real world? It's really about finding truth in a digital world, finding truth in digital data. And as Florian mentioned earlier, that data is growing exponentially. The regulations are emerging on a regular basis, on a daily basis. Especially in the US, we have 50 states, and all of them have different varying regulations. So you think it's a challenge in Europe, but you apply 50 different states to all of this, it can be very challenging. So how do you find truth in a digital world with all this complexity and with massive data growth? This is what drives our business. This is what we do as a business. So we wanted to start there. So with that as a foundational sort of a starting point, we also looked at what are the drivers for making sure that we're responsible and have ethical AI. And of course, I mentioned some of the regulations that we looked to, but there are societal concerns and pressures, sort of our moral obligation and ethical obligation. The regulations are changing each and every day. So just mindful of the environment that we're in, the concerns and sensitivities around AI in general, both from a societal standpoint, government, academic, and corporate. And this is what's sort of driving us on one end, sort of pragmatically, and then aspirationally, what are we really shooting for here? What do we want to achieve with AI? Not just as a business, but as good corporate citizens, as good stewards of AI. And AI, again, can do all kinds of amazing things if it's applied appropriately. So it can drive economic growth. It can open up opportunities, educational and otherwise. It can build trust in communities. It can help with sustainability. And so improving health outcomes and so on. So these are the aspirational goals. But really, when you look at the objectives, the AI really needs to be promoted in cases where it can increase efficiency and automation, solve problems that you just can't do, using human methods that have been used for decades or centuries, help with that decision analysis, decision support, and conceive of new ideas, drive innovation. These are sort of the key objectives. And so it is with this context that we were able to kind of look and see from our standpoint, and this is purely from a Nuix standpoint, and you would apply this to your own businesses, what are the principles? What are the key things we want to have? And they came down to, as I showed already, explainability, accessibility, specificity, fairness, and safety. These are the things that we want to protect as we move through the development of new AI technologies in support of our mission. So I just wanted to take you through that because it was a very involved process, but very worthwhile, because everything we do going forward can rest on this as a foundational truth. So let me talk a little bit about what we mean by explainability. I've seen this term used and misused, in my opinion, for quite some time. Explainability to us means truly giving tangible, demonstrable visibility into the training sets that were used, into the data that was used to train the models, and also into what is driving the results? How are you achieving these results? And really what we're saying here is you need to eliminate or very, very strongly reduce this notion of a black box. And the black box, if you haven't heard the term before, it really means it is closed off, it's opaque. You don't know what's inside, you don't know what's happening there, and therefore the outcomes become somewhat less trusted. And if they're right, they're right. And if they're not right, you don't know why. And you also don't know if they're right because you don't have insight inside. So this notion of explainability is something that we feel very passionate about. What you're seeing on the screen are some screenshots from our technology that really sort of open up that black box and give the user this really useful insight into what's driving the models, what terms are really causing the model to come out with the outcomes they are. How are we saying that this document is a confidentiality agreement? What are the components? What are the facets? How do we know that that's actually true? And you can export those documents out and say, this is the training set that was used to create that model. And I think this is really sort of critical to everything. And at the end of the day, it comes down to how do you trust the system, right? So basically creating the credibility and defensibility behind what you do, that's explainability to us. Now, accessibility is sort of rides on that. It says, all right, well, how then do you make sure that a layperson, a subject matter expert, as opposed to an engineering or AI expert, because there are very few of those, they're hard to find, they're hard to hire, they're hard to retain, they're expensive, and there are just simply not enough of them to go around. So it's important and critical, we believe, that the technology be accessible and understandable and interpretable by people who are close to the data, understand the nature of the problem they're trying to solve, rather than always handing this off to more technical teams that are now separated and you lose something in translation. It slows the process down and so on. So we wanted to make the tool, and we believe it's important to build the tool around making it easy to access, to build, tune, test, verify, validate models with as little coding as possible. Ours is a no-code environment. We can't expect everyone to have that level of no code, but really it's about human control, humans in the control of, in the driver's seat, if you will. Again, you'll see on the screen some screenshots where a domain expert can come in, they can add weights, they can reduce weights, they can remove bias, they can add negative weights to things that they want to push away. They can see a star rating of how well this model may perform in the real world and validate which models, which documents in the model set are not performing well, to either make sure there's more representation of those documents or remove them altogether because they don't belong there. Again, just a little bit of insight into what we think of when we think about accessibility. It's about human control. So explainability, what is this system doing? How is it built? And accessibility are the first two, giving trust and human control. The third is a little bit more nebulous. It's harder to get your head around, this idea of narrow AI. Narrow AI meaning you solve real-world problems, targeted problems, specific problems to make sure the system is focused. And really this drives the accuracy. It also reduces your risk. So you're not, so if you think about things like OpenAI and Google Gemini, Anthropic's Claude, these are incredibly powerful systems that do very interesting things with very, very large generalized data sets, which is super cool and very interesting and has its place. But in our opinion, the goal would be to use the smallest model possible that gets the job done the best, that minimizes the risk of overfitting or using too much data, and allows you more flexibility around where that model is stored, where it's deployed, how explainable it is, and really ultimately, is it targeted at what you're trying to do? So can you be more focused and accurate by defining what it is you want to do and then applying AI to that? Again, reducing your risk and exposure and accelerating the process, making the outcome more accurate and understandable. So those are our top three. Obviously, some of the most important aspects of this are in the safety and fairness, right? And this is where the GDPR and the regulations come in. Also, our moral and ethical obligations as stewards of AI. We really want to drive home and make practical and operationalize this in a meaningful way. So how do you make sure that privacy, data privacy is kept? Bias mitigation. How can you identify the bias and how can you mitigate it, both before you build the models, and of course, you're never going to remove all of it after the models are in place. Are there methods in place to be able to identify those areas of bias, remove them, and tweak and tune the model over time so that it becomes better and better over time? These are the things that drive the ethical outcomes, the responsible capabilities, and really hold you accountable to what it is that you're doing. So I want to drill a little bit more specifically into the privacy, because I do believe in, especially in Europe, but I do think over time it will flesh across all regions of the globe. Data privacy is still paramount, and individual privacy is really critical in all of this. Because if you think about what drives artificial intelligence, it's not algorithms, it's data. And where does that data come from? Well, a myriad of sources, but what that data does is it potentially puts personal information at risk, sensitive information, confidential information, intellectual property, and so on. So it's critical that when data sets are curated, this goes back to minimizing the amount of data that you have. Anonymizing the data is a critical component. So removing or encrypting identifiers like names, addresses, and national numbers. There are multiple methods of doing that. And we can sort of follow up in a follow-up discussion if there are questions about how to do that, but many methods of doing that. Critical aspect of governance here. Minimizing the data set, as I mentioned, to make sure that there's purpose and focus behind what you're doing. That also helps to sort of mitigate privacy issues. Security measures. This applies to all your systems anyway, so we would hope that each organization has their own, high set of security standards around the software they develop or the software that they use. And those should not be limited to just those systems. They should apply across the AI as it gets layered into the system. So making sure there's secure data storage. Where are your data sets stored and housed? Are there regular audits of that data? Is there data leakage? Is the personnel trained on where they're allowed to take data sets from? How to employ these anonymization capabilities? Who has access? So on and so forth. Transparency and consent, right? Do we have authorization to use this data? There's a lot being said right now about concerns with the large data models, OpenAI, and so on. Do they have authorization to use all of the data that they're doing in the way that they're doing it? And the jury is still out, and it's very murky on this. We're not all OpenAI. We don't have $13 billion invested from Microsoft to spend on litigation and lawyers. So we need to be much more explicit and controlled and focused and disciplined around transparency and consent when it comes to data models. I've had my own data privacy officer tell me, no, you're not allowed to use that data model, even if it was found open on the internet, because it was not released by an authoritative organization to the internet. Therefore, it cannot be, used in this way or that way. So again, there are checks and balances, very important to get consent. And obviously, stay on top of regulatory awareness, compliance. As I mentioned, it's challenging because they're changing by the day. But again, if you mitigate that by focusing on the ones and really shrinking that footprint, focusing on the regulatory compliance areas and locations that you want to focus on, I think is critical here to keeping you on track. So I want to touch on one other key thing here that I think gets really confusing for folks, and that is we live in a world now over the last 18 months of generative AI. So OpenAI back in November, almost a year and a half ago now, really put us all into a little bit of a tailspin here because they released a technology that was extremely exciting, that captured the world's imagination, but really created a heck of a lot of confusion. And over the last year, I would say the media has done a fairly poor job at this. I think maybe our own internal excitement around this technology has sort of created confusion. And it turns out that it seems like what people believe is all AI is generative AI. That's sort of, when someone says AI, what they mean is the open AIs of the world, this technology that generates net new content. And that is very far from the truth. So when it comes to thinking about AI, just recognize that there are different kinds of AI. And the way I like to think about it in an analogy, and I think about things in analogies. And so when it comes to AI, I think left brain, right brain. The left brain is known to be more analytical, more fact-based, and really not very creative. That's where I think cognitive AI, sort of that traditional machine learning, natural language processing, semantic and contextual enrichment of data. This is where you do the prediction, the pattern detection, the prioritization. Where you find needles in haystacks is really where the cognitive AI stands. So very fact-based, deterministic. If you ask for a result using the same data, you're going to get the same response every single time for the most part. Right brain is really where it gets creative, right? And we've all heard about this term stochastic, which is really sort of leans towards more of a random outcome. Generates net new data. It's creative. This is where you can do chatbots, query and response, text summarization, advanced storytelling, list making. Very interesting use of the AI technology, but very different. And the key is that they both have their own sets of risks, which I'm not going to get into now, but I just want to make sure that I drive home the point that not all AI is generative AI, and that choosing the right tool for the job is really what it's about. It's not just about, oh, go get ChatGPT, wrap something around it, and think you're done for the day. That is I hate to say it this way, that's a lazy way to address the problems. It really needs to be more thoughtful than that, especially given the murkiness around the generative AI, how explainable it is, and all of the regulations around it that are still questionable at this point, from copyright to black box issues and so on. So with that, I'd like to sort of finalize this and come to a point where I say, this one slide I've added here is something to think about. It's not a requirement, but something that I think we're internalizing here at Nuix. And that is, if you're going to have good governance around your artificial intelligence, which we strongly suggest, think about including AI as part of your corporate governance stack. That is to say, there are these pillars of corporate governance that all of our organizations must follow, tools and activities, monitoring and reporting, basically a framework for how we think about corporate governance. And I've listed some of them here on this chart: anti-bribery, corporate governance, and so on and so forth, financial governance, human rights. So think about including AI governance as one of those pillars. What that will do is basically create a discipline and a consistency around how you want to apply governance in this way. And I think it just, and again, it just creates a mindset around governance that you should be including into your thought tracks. So that's just one suggestion that I wanted to put out there for folks. Now, the final thing that I would like to say to leave you with today is some practical things that you can take away from the presentation that I think allow you to sort of demystify and take realistic steps towards doing this. So I want to drive home some of the themes that I've discussed today and really leave you with some ideas of what you can do to make this practical. The first is again to remind you about aligning your AI with your vision and your mission. Each of us has our own mission, our own goals, our own North Star, if you will. Really, you should be thinking about not AI leading the charge, but really supporting what it is that you do and making what you do already and your focus as an organization, making it that much better. So align your AI to your vision and your mission. That will help drive things. Focus on meaningful, realistic objectives. I think the biggest problem that I see from the customers that I talk to is that they try these big, grandiose projects and they fail because they try to bite off more than they can chew, and they run into too many problems, too many challenges, and basically it never goes anywhere. So think big for sure, but start small. And this can be on very tactical, addressable issues that you can then build from, build that credibility, build that comfort level, and then grow from there. And the third is to really make sure, and I drive this point home, establish governance early on. Don't add it later on, like a whipped topping on top of the pie. It needs to be baked into and a key ingredient in the pie while you're making it. So practice building in governance and compliance capabilities right from the start, because that will enforce that down the track instead of making it a hard add-on later. It will also train your people to be disciplined around this. We started right from the top, our general counsel, our board, and straight down from the CEO through our general counsel and our data privacy team to our security team. That is the main driver for our governance and the starting point for AI. So I have very little say over what we do until it goes through that channel first, which really ensures that we're driving this from a very sound and responsible way, as opposed to it being shifted upward from the tech team saying, we need to use AI, and then try to apply these afterwards. And then finally, I would strongly suggest that no organization has all of that expertise internally. Maybe in Dr. Sharial's case, that's different, but from our standpoint, external expertise is really useful. And I've listed a couple of organizations that we are engaging. You can engage third-party organizations like Trustable out of the US, Oxethica out of the UK. They spun out of Oxford University. And there are myriad other ones that you can point to help guide you through the process and make all of this much more accessible and allow you to address it in a meaningful way. Because I do think by doing it by yourself is not a very easy thing to do. So with that, I'm going to leave you with a single quote from this former ambassador to Australia. Actually, he's a former chairman of our board, and he's the current chief and legal policy officer at Cruise, which is a self-driving car manufacturer. And it really resonates with me because it comes from a presentation he gave at one of our user conferences a year ago. It drives home this notion of technology, truth, and trust. In this world that we live in, that's driven by technology, where truth is really hard to figure out, and where trust is at a minimum, societies fall apart if we lose trust. And so as stewards of technology, I want you to be thinking about AI as part of building that trust, not hurting that trust. And AI is on the bubble there. It's still creating issues of trust around organizations and institutions. And so again, I think when it comes to AI, more so than just traditional IT, we really need to be very thoughtful about its application, about its governance, to ensure that we maintain that trust. Because the algorithm could be amazing, but if no one trusts it, it's a paperweight and it's fairly useless. So I leave you with this quote because I do think it's a very important thing to take away from today's discussion. So with that, I'm going to just put the obligatory disclaimer here for everyone to see, and then I will just leave you with a final thank you, and to see if there are any questions that came up during the session that we can now address with the remaining time that we have.
Christopher, first of all, thank you for enlightening us. And yes, there have been a couple of questions that have been directed to me. And maybe if we could work on them together to enlighten our audience a bit further. And I think the first one is quite interesting because I think you're in a really particular good position to answer it, because the question is there any cultural difference regarding what constitute ethical for an AI system? So to put it in a frame of reference, I've seen organizations coming to Germany, Walmart is a good example, who actually put their ethics into their business model here in Germany and failed spectacularly. And I know for a fact, when I have discussions with my colleagues across the pond and across the channel, that we sometimes stumble across vast differences in terms of what is acceptable in for example, handling employee records, employee data, and from a data protection point of view, there are also vast differences. But can you speak on ethical in terms of culturally appropriate across the globe?
Yeah, wow. That is a very interesting one, right? Because it's extremely nuanced, and culture does play a factor. Absolutely, there are differences in ethics, even in the nomenclature that we use. I think the way that we've approached it is about as good as you can do it, which is we have an ethics panel that sits within our organization. And the critical aspect of the ethics panel is that there is a diversity in that team so that you get different perspectives, gender, and national origin, as well as the countries, at least that we are engaged in. So there's representation across those. And I think we need to then just simply take that diverse team, and then we apply those ethics in three ways. We apply these ethics in terms of if we want to be engaged in this particular country. Some people just say, we're not going to do work in China, or we're not going to do work in Russia. But what's interesting is, or they'll say, well, we're definitely work in the US. But if the use case doesn't really fit with your own ethical standards, you might not want to do work with a business in the US, and you may want to work with an organization in Russia that is maybe battling corruption or, on the right side of an issue. So we look at it from country, we look at it from use case, and then of course just the ethical overall. So I do think it's a very good question. There's no easy answer for it. I think each organization needs to handle it in their own way. And the way we're trying to do it is by having a focus on ethics and then making sure that team is diverse so that we're not just so monolithically thinking about how we apply our AI. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think if I may add, you should always know the surrounding you work in. So if you want to do business in Germany, you should know how things are rolling in Germany. Same is true if I want to do business in Australia. I should know myself around Australia and not simply come around like, hey, I know the world and I know how things should be rolling, and assume that everyone agrees with me. So having quite a huge of respect for cultural difference, I think it's helpful to be accepted.
Absolutely.
The next question I think is also quite interesting. Um, the question is, do I have to comply with AI law as an end user, or is it just on the developers? So you want to start and I chime in?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think when you chime in, it'll be helpful from a data privacy perspective, because I think that applies more broadly to everybody involved. I do think that obviously, in an ideal world, the end user has a responsibility as well to think about this ethically. But I think ultimately it's the provider, it's the organization that's making money at developing and supplying the technology that really is mainly accountable. And then if you're creating your own models and doing your own thing, I think at that point, depending on how the EULA is written up, you're taking on a certain responsibility yourself. So AI is interesting because the technology like Microsoft Word is baked, and it just sits there and it is what it is, and the company can back it. With AI, you have this ability to create your own models in some cases, and in which case you now take on that responsibility as the customer. So there's a little bit of fogginess there. But Florian, would you?
Sure. And I think we have to differentiate between ethically responsible and judicially responsible here. Because yes, I agree with you totally. As you, as the creator of the software, have the ethical responsibility of what can be done with your solution. But in the end user is judicially responsible, or the company using that tool is responsible for how it is used, and also the employees of that organization. I think it's the very same logic you find with weapons. So is, for example, Heckler & Koch responsible for the rifle they create? Yes, in general, but the person wielding that gun is responsible for using it, for example, as a hunting weapon, or as an assault rifle in, for example, a shoot by. There's a huge difference. Everything can be misused, and that is always up to the circumstances of the individual case. So you cannot simply say something is good or bad. A technology or a software solution is a tool. The question is how you use that tool, because you can pervert Nuix and to do stupid and illegal things with that. It's not your intent, but it can be always used in a way that is not intended. And there lies the crux of that question. There is no broad answer beside, yes, ethically, Nuix, sorry if I take you as an example, is responsible for bringing Nuix into the world, but we as a user are responsible for how we use it and to use it in accordance with local laws and local ethical standards. We have another question. Do you have any real-world example where there were ethical considerations for using your AI?
Yes, but I'm not allowed to talk about them. So
Maybe in broad terms.
yes. So there is a global conflict taking place, and there are global players involved in a global conflict where corruption is an issue, and the use of technologies has been a concern, because there's a concern that perhaps the technology could be leveraged or exploited by the wrong side of that conflict. And so because perhaps there are challenges with security or infiltration that is out of our control. So it's, you go into situations where you hope to improve the situation, but you may be harming it in some ways. So there's an ethical question there. We also have honestly had ethical considerations around large social media company usage of our technology. We have found that ethically okay if it's to help with maybe mental health and reducing risks of teenagers and so on. But we do not allow our system to be used if in case they want to maybe target and allow people to be targeted with misinformation, disinformation as part of that. So we have ethical challenges with certain organizations that we'll deal with, and to make sure that there are firewalls between those usages. So ethical considerations come up more often than you would imagine, and we have literally not taken very large accounts because of ethical concerns.
That's actually quite good to know that even if you are a huge organization, you have a conscience that and a moral compass. That's always good to know, and one of the reasons we like to work with you guys. I have one final question, and that stems from me. Where do you see the development of Nuix heading? Because that's on my mind and on many of our clients' minds. Where is Nuix heading to? And especially, will there be changes in how it can be applied to data in the future? So will there be new things that are up on the agenda?
Absolutely. So we're going through a transition, as all companies do, from more of a component-based capability where we have individual products that kind of sit on their own and you can put them together as a customer to do amazing things. We're moving to more of a solution based organization where we stitch these things together to create an end-to-end workflow. We think, as you discussed earlier, Florian, the nature of data is growing so much. We really need to reduce the effort that our customers put into this. So we really want to make a seamless workflow where we can take large amounts of data, make it understandable in an explainable way for all use case, for multiple use cases. And that includes the orchestration of that process to make it easier to do. In terms of applying AI in this way, we're really taking what we call a cautious urgency approach. We really want to be thoughtful about when and how we apply AI. And that's the reason why we're not rushing out and just applying generative AI to everything we do. There's a lot of pressure to do that, and we are not doing that. We are basically sticking to what's important to our customers, and that is to keep them out of harm's way, stay responsible as stewards of AI. So we're really driving innovation as fast as we can, but with this sort of governor on there that says it must be done responsibly, it must keep our customers out of harm's way, and we must be thinking about this in a responsible way. So you can look to the future where we'll be leveraging generative AI, but doing it in a meaningful way that reduces hallucinations and minimizes the risks, probably using a lot more open source language models that can be deployed on-premise as needed if folks have that requirement, as opposed to forcing customers to push their data out into the cloud where they don't know exactly what's happening with it. So those are things that you can see coming down the pike from Nuix as we continue to roll on here.
Great, thank you very much. We've made it to the point. It's 4 o'clock, and we can conclude our meeting. Thank you very much, Christopher. And it was a pleasure talking with you. And I see I really looking forward to having a similar discussion with you again.
Sounds great. Thanks again, everyone, for joining, and I really appreciate the time. And Grant Thornton, thanks again for making this happen. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye-bye.